All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Orbit. Today I'm with Lillian Karabaic.
Yeah, you got it right.
Boom! Runs Oh My Dollar, which is a radio program. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I will tell you about Oh My Dollar. I don't really know where to start with
Yeah.
myself. That's a much larger to unpack question. But yeah, Oh My Dollar is a personal finance radio show, and we mainly exist because I was extremely frustrated that all the personal finance resources out there were targeted at like the 2.5 kids white picket fence has only one job sort of the world that no one I knew lived in. And I accidentally ended up in the world of doing personal finance because I, like most people in my generation, had like a bunch of part-time jobs and never had any benefits or like a pension or even access to a 401k. And the show is a weekly radio show and podcast, which is how a lot of people consume it, unless you happen to be in one of the 8 cities we're syndicated in. And we're also an online community, so we're actually like a pretty robust online forum. Believe it or not, people still use forums in 2020. And yeah, we're about 250,000 hits a month, but also just like a really supportive place for people to talk about their finances, their cats, their plants. Finances are probably the smallest portion, I would say, of what we talk about.
It's a like an excuse.
Yeah, well, and we do monthly challenges on the online forum. So every single month we'll have some sort of challenge, which is financially related, but it'll often be about tackling one area of your finances. So right now we're doing Snackuary, which is lowering your food costs, and people like identify their own ways in which they're going to lower their food costs, or like rethink the way that they're approaching food in their life. We also have like year-long challenges this year as part of the 20 in 2020 challenges, which are saving 20% of your income, or for really high achievers, saving $20,000 this year. And then we also have the Save $20 a week challenge. And we have like a bingo challenge where you get to like make a bingo board of 24 goals and try to cross them off during the year. So we did a lot of just like, achievable for anybody. But at the end of it, you get cat stickers, which is the core part of Oh My Dollar, is that my book is called A Cat's Guide to Money, and it's cats explaining personal finance, and it's
Right.
And
that's fantastic.
It's, which is just part of the goal is to make it accessible, right? I think the thing that I learned was that you don't have to be an expert in finance in order to feel confident about your money, but it's so hard to get over that hump of all the societal messages telling you that, like, if you're a creative person, you can't be good at money, or because of your upbringing, or the messages that you received about money growing up, because we all have internalized a bunch of messages about money. They might be positive, they might be negative, but like we're all carrying around the baggage of the environment in which we grew up and what it says about how we handle money.
Nice.
And so it takes some like really cute cats to get over that, pretty much. Yeah.
How many people are in this like forum community? Like, how many people are you working with?
It's a lot. I would say like active daily users were around 500, like people that like are like regular active users.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have like more than that altogether, but people kind of, as their lives, whether or not they have more time to spend on an internet community kind of varies based on how their lives are going at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How, like, what is it, forums mainly, or are you chatting on like Discord or something?
No, it's all forums. We're entirely on a forum. Yeah, and a lot of people know each other IRL now. And there are a lot more people that consume my content than are active in the online community, right? So like the average episode of my show it goes out on 8 broadcast radio stations in like 5 states, and then it gets like 50K downloads per episode. So, and then like 500 active daily users. So that gives you like a contrast of like, it's really a small portion. But the big thing is it's a really supportive online community that doesn't try to tell you what is right or wrong with your money, because there isn't. And there's no right or wrong answers with this, right?
Right. It's like
your
tailored.
own values. Yeah.
Speaking of which, like, I think tailoring it to your lifestyle, you have like 3 jobs more. Like, what are you doing on a day to day? Because I was looking at your blog and I was like, you are all over the place.
I am all over the place. So, I mean, I am like the quintessential millennial who lives in Portland, in that, like, I've always had a lot of jobs simply because I've worked in the nonprofit industry, and quite often they just didn't have the ability to make me full time. And so I've always had a lot of weird jobs. Like, I was zine librarian for 7 years for the second largest collection of zines in the world. I was a bicycle valet. Literally, I was paid to valet park bikes every day for years as one of my part-time jobs, and did database stuff. But for all of last year, 2019, I worked on Oh My Dollar full-time, and that was just my only job, which was actually a challenge that someone in the Oh My Dollar community issued to me. They were like, what would happen if you just only did Oh My Dollar for a year? And I'd gotten to the point where both my savings and Oh My Dollar's revenue was at the point where I felt like it was like possible to do, largely because I have Patreon support. I mean, we have a lot of revenue sources for Oh My Dollar, but like, that was the only consistent thing that I knew would come in. And
that's awesome. I work with a lot of folks that like love Patreon. They're like, the reason I'm able to do a lot of what I do is because of Patreon. How has that been for you to do that last year?
I am so glad I did it. At the time that when I first did it, you know, Oh My Dollar already had quite a lot of revenue, not like a lot in volume, but a lot in a bunch of different ways. We'd done like a 20K Kickstarter. I had regular amounts of money coming in from my wholesaler for the book. I got paid a lot of, like, the big chunks of money for me come from paying as a speaker. So I go and speak at colleges and to like creatives about money. But and then I get money from advertising and radio syndication fees. So there was this guilt factor that came into asking my audience for support, because I felt like I should be able to do this like on my own. What does that even mean? I don't know. Like, but my background obviously was nonprofit fundraising. Like, I prior to starting Oh My Dollar, I was a political fundraiser. And so asking people for support for someone else's project felt way safer to me. I was willing to look people in the eye and ask them for 20K to get someone I don't even really know elected. But it was so hard to be like, will you give $1 a month to this podcast that you've been listening to for years? And it has been really helpful. Like, it does not in any way pay all of the core expenses for Oh My Dollar. Like, we have a lot of like overhead. I pay contractors. Obviously, I enjoy paying myself. I don't always have to do that now that I have other jobs again. But the big thing for me was that it was consistency. So I knew that there was a certain amount that was going to be coming in each month. And like, even as someone who like has had day jobs, that was even a thing that wasn't guaranteed. Like, if you work service industry or any kind of hourly role or a lot of part-time roles, you don't even have that certainty that something is coming in every month. But it's like taken to a much higher level of an extreme when you're an entrepreneur, especially an entrepreneur. There's a lot to unpack there. I know
there is.
So
one question though.
Yeah.
Like, one of the things I noticed just from looking at your website is that you appear to be very tech savvy.
I guess.
How did that happen, and how do you picture your use of like the tools available?
I guess the question is the definition of tech savvy, because I believe I'm just like slightly ahead of maybe the average millennial. Like, I don't describe myself as a web developer, but by the same token, I've been a plenary speaker at Indie Web Summit. So like, I am comfortable in a lot of like front end environments, like anybody who's maintained a blog before is, right? Where you're like, oh yeah, I can do HTML and Markdown, and like I know some JavaScript and stuff like that. But my like competency with tech is that I'm not afraid of it, and I know when I need to pay someone else to get something done. So I've mostly worked in really small organizations, and I am the most tech competent person there, so it ends up being part of my role. The thing I would say I actually have skills in, which often at the end of the day is like, if I need a job that will pay me well, is data. And that's simply because when I went to school for economics, and so I have like a pretty deep data background, with like SQL and stuff like that. But that's not development. That's just like, I know how to move large data sets around.
Where were you going to school? Where was that, in Portland?
Yeah, so I was a non-traditional student. I dropped out of high school and got my GED and moved to, after like working a bunch of jobs in my Midwestern hometown. At 18, I moved to a hippie commune in the middle of the woods in Oregon for 6 months. And that was like 14, 15 years ago. And haven't left really Oregon since. Like, I've been domiciled here. I've done some stints in India and Germany. But like, this has been essentially my home since then. And I considered going to college. Like, I did 2 terms in AmeriCorps. And because of that, I got some education assistance award. Essentially, you get some scholarship money. You work for like $3 an hour for the government for a year. And at the end of that, they give you a really tiny taxable amount to use towards school. I say tiny because it's like $6,000, but in the scale of paying for an education, it ends up being relatively small. But I did 2 terms in AmeriCorps, so I got 2 education awards. And I also waited till I was old enough to go to college that my parents' income didn't count towards my aid award. So I ended up going to school in Portland. I kept considering leaving. I actually got into a school in upstate New York. And then I kept deferring semester by semester. I'd be like, oh, I have this thing to finish in Portland. Like, I'd have some project going on in Portland. And I'd be like, okay, well, I'll be there next semester. And then after like 3 semesters of deferring, I had to be like, I think you should maybe stay here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as far as staying in Portland, you do what appears to be so much traveling.
Well, that was a big factor in the year that I was able to take to just work on Oh My Dollar. Was I knew that this wasn't probably in its current form, the form that it was in last year, where I didn't have any staff. I just had contractors, and I was my own boss. And other than the radio show, which can be like pre-batched and recorded, I didn't have a lot of physical things I needed to be in Portland for. So I kind of took a lot more advantage of that last year, including like, one of the advantages of being a creative entrepreneur was that I was able to just go live in London for a month. And like, I invented a work excuse to be there, but like, I got like a crappy flat and rented it. And then, had my business rent a co-working space within walking distance, and was able to just spend a month living in London and like use that to get myself out of my head and my routines. And also because like, when else am I going to have a chance to do that? Right.
Right.
Like, it's when I think there are so many hard parts about working for yourself and being a creative entrepreneur. And that's largely why I ended up going back to having a day job and also running Oh My Dollar on top of it. Was the hard parts, I started to overrule the upsides. But I think it's really important to remember and take advantage of the upsides. Like Cal Newport, who wrote this blog called Study Hacks that I was a huge fan of when I was a student. But he wrote, one of the things he talked about is like, when you are a grad student, your life is so unique. And even though being a grad student is hard, it's uniquely hard. And like, you have to do a lot of like, especially if you're in certain types of academic settings as a grad student, you're having to think about really big concepts and working on these really long range projects. But there always needs to be time where you recognize how cool it is that you could just like go to a movie theater at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, right? And that it's totally okay to do that sometimes, and that because you are making certain choices in your life that are making your life harder, aka choosing to be a grad student and probably taking out debt, or at the very least not earning a lot of money for several years on end to try to solve a question that maybe in the end is statistically insignificant, like for a job in one of the hardest, if you want to become in academia, like one of the hardest job markets and most complicated job markets, at least take advantage of how cool it is. Because I think being like a creative entrepreneur, people find it like there's a lot of like hustle culture, and especially if you are part of your product, like if you're doing YouTube or Instagram and like your persona is part of the product that you're selling, which I try to avoid, but there is some factor of that in my, like I make money from speaking, I make money from my voice on air. Like there is some factor of like what people are buying is the fact that I'm talking about finance, but that I
am friendly.
I'm friendly, but also like there can be some factors of like, oh, people are like, that's a lifestyle I want, right? Like, oh, I want to take finance advice from someone whose lifestyle fits my ideal lifestyle, like volunteering or traveling, or, you know, they look like me or they sound like me, whatever. Because I don't talk about anything groundbreaking in finance. I give the same advice that an old boring white dude would give, but I give it in a way that actually is relevant to my audience, and I give it in a friendly, approachable way to my audience who are not old white dudes.
Yeah, I think that's super valuable. I think that's really valuable, and that's kind of what I like. What I'm doing is I'm reading a ton of like very difficult and dry things with the specific purpose of making it fun for my friends.
Right. My friend K. Mike EM, who is a publicly traded person, he actually came on my show a while ago, but anyway, you can buy shares in him and then you get a vote on his life decisions. He's great. But K. Mike EM for a long time had this thing going on where, as part of his K. Mike EM experiment, where you were shareholders, he would pay people to read extremely dry, like a Harvard Business Review sort of compendiums, and he would like pay freelancers to read them and write him summaries so that then he could deliver that as content to his shareholders, also as part of his persona of being K. Mike EM, who's like one of the things the shareholders voted on is for years he had to only wear Brooks Brothers suits. And so that was just his K. Mike EM persona. He's super fascinating.
Yeah, someone to investigate at a later date. Well,
I think at some point there's going to be like a Netflix series about him, but...
Oh, I'm certain. I'm down. To get back to you have a whole page that's your life metrics.
Oh, I have way more than one page.
Yeah. I mean, like, there was a page, I can click metrics and I see some of them, and you keep track of so much.
So every year I put out a zine, which is my annual report. So in it has a bunch of metrics, including, this is a transit map of all my jobs if you wanted to try to
you posted this on Twitter, and I loved that.
Yeah, I think I posted the updated one because this is my 2016 report. And I've had a lot of jobs since 2016 because that's just how I roll. But yeah, I do a lot of these. And then I post my expenses publicly on my website every month. I do my revenue, but I used to do it every month, but to be fair, my accounting is very behind right now, which is why I haven't posted it. It's a lot easier to just post your income when you have like a regular job. It's a lot harder when you have
to calculate.
As you can tell behind me, this is all books. So I, like, a large part of my business is I ship out books and stickers and cat stickers and everything for my house, and like that's, I think, probably about 50% of my gross revenue. But obviously I have what's called COGS, which is cost of goods sold. So I have a lot of accounting stuff to do. But anyway, yeah. So I post a bunch of metrics, and I think I'm on a 13 years of tracking all this data about myself. And I've given a couple talks on it. So anybody is extremely interested in all the data they can track about myself, they can go look up my Quantified self-talks, because I try to go to that every year. But yeah, I used to publish this annual report and mail it like all over the world to like people that cared to be on the list. I'm at the point where my audience is large enough. I cannot, unfortunately, afford to mail reports to everybody who wants one. Because it used to just be like I covered the cost of postage and printing and shipping, and
it doesn't scale.
It was my Christmas letter, essentially, right? You know, it was my secular nerd economist Christmas letter every year, and that it kind of stopped scaling, and so now I'm in between. Actually, this Sunday I'm going to work on last year's annual reports. So I'm collecting all this data continuously, but one of the things I kind of do that I think is unique, because when I started doing this, there was no form of aggregate, like automated data tracking, right? Like this is before Spotify, this is before Spotify your year, this is before Facebook, like did any sort of like look back on your year thing. This is before Fitbits or any of that. And so it was like very radical to be tracking this much data about yourself. And like really the only people that had that level of like logging and data tracking generally were like weirdos like me and people with type 1 diabetes that are required to like log their blood sugar and stuff like that. It since then it's become this thing where like it's very normal to be like, yeah, I got 10,000 steps today. Like 10 years ago, if you had told someone you did 10,000 steps today, everybody would have been like, what did you, what? Like, you know, and I like my original like focus and, you know, like what I was doing for the first half of my career was transportation stuff. I served in AmeriCorps for the bicycle transportation lines. And like we commissioned like federally funded studies trying to figure out how many miles people walked and biked in different circumstances, and just getting people to wear pedometers correctly was like, you would pay them, and trying to get them to wear pedometers was like so challenging. And now people like go and spend hundreds of dollars on fancy pedometers to wear on their wrist, and of their own money. So the thing that I kind of brought to it is that like I've been doing it for a long time, and they used to be really simple, but I then went to school for economics in my mid-20s, and I got very good at like data and regressions and data visualization and stuff. And so my stuff started getting more and more elaborate, but then it became more and more normalized to know these data about yourself.
Right.
Then my stuff got weirder and more esoteric. Like, how do I drink more cups of coffee when I'm in a relationship or out of relationship? I mean, like, what kind of questions can I ask that, and then like how can I represent them in interesting ways?
Yeah, I'm very interested, but I don't have the time right now. The question like I want to go to is that at a certain point, I'm curious, how do you do it all? How do you manage your time? Because
poorly. Okay. So I really do know the question of this because I track all my time in 15-minute increments. So, so I can like run the numbers for you. So I will say that I just started working a full-time job in addition to working 15 hours a week at the radio station that I'm based out of. And then I also work on Oh My Dollar. And I that's not like long-term sustainable. And I'm very like aware of that, but it's a choice that I'm making right now for specific reasons. And it's not even like a revenue choice. Like it's great that I'm getting paid by 3 different things, although I'm pretty much taking almost all the income from Oh My Dollar and diverting it into people to do things for me. Right? Because Oh My Dollar can be a full-time job, but like obviously I can't work 2 full-time jobs and a 15-hour-a-week job at my radio station. So it's a choice that I've chosen to make at this like moment. And I think one thing that's really important if you're someone that has like divergent interests and is ambitious about creating things is to recognize that you can have seasons. And like last year was a season of like travel, wrapping my head around processes and establishing processes to be able to like, because 2 years prior, I couldn't have traveled for 4 weeks out of the country and put an episode out every week. There's just no, I didn't have the systems in place for that. And so that was recognizing that like I had a season of a lot of travel last year, and because of that I pursued a lot more brand deals and stuff outside the country that I knew would be able to justify that. And I also put away a lot less money, right? Because I chose to do that. This is the season where I'm saving a lot of money, and I am also making the choice. Is my audio cutting in and out for you?
It's getting a little quiet sometimes, but it's not cutting in and out.
My headphones are making noises like they're disconnecting. Does it sound fine now?
It sounds good now.
Okay. Sorry. I was hearing my headphones like switching. So I'm inarticulately trying to get to the point that I think it's okay to have seasons, and like, yes, you cannot do everything at the same time. And like, I constantly have to tell myself that, like, I constantly have to be the wet blanket of like, you don't get to have at all of the projects that you want to have. But it's okay to say in this season, this is the project that then supports later. Like, right. It's a lot easier to be like, okay, I'm working a lot right now because I'm laying the foundation of savings or a certain kind of contacts or whatever it is to be able to do this other thing later. And it isn't always a trade-off. Like, I like all of my jobs. Like, I'm not doing jobs that I hate in order to save money, because I think that's like a pervasive myth that there's these like well-paying terrible jobs out there apparently that creatives can just like get to fund their creative passions. I don't believe in that. I like all of my jobs. These are the ones that I'm choosing to focus on now. One thing that I do that has been really important to my time management is I publicly post my not to-do list. So I post my goals and like review how I did every year on my website. And it's mostly an exercise for me. Like, I don't care if anybody else reads it, but I know it's out on the internet, so I feel more accountable. But one of the parts of that is every year I do a not to-do list. And the not to-do list is like, it might be things I really want to do. It's not like the not to-do list isn't stuff I don't necessarily want to do, but sometimes it is. Sometimes the not to-do list is just care about my apartment being clean. Like, you know, like so and like generally in life, one of the things for me is my not to-do list is like, I don't have kids, right? Which frees up a heck ton of time and money compared to someone else my age who statistically is more likely to have offspring, right? And has to balance the childcare and the money for that, and not being able to like it's hard enough with 2 household members for me to coordinate both of us being gone and someone to watch my cat. Like,
yeah. I think I'm right with you there. It's like there's no room for a child to be in this unit. How old are you, may I ask?
I'm 32.
32. See, like, that's, again, for the amount of things that you've done, that blows my mind. Because I feel like you've done maybe 2 lifetimes worth of shit.
I had a friend who said, when you first meet me, you feel like Lily has all the stories and she couldn't possibly have done all these things. And he said, by like the second month, you know, Lily, you've heard them all and you realize like it's totally possible and it all fits together. But in the beginning, you're just like, no, there's no way. Because like I haven't even like talked about half of it.
As a generalist,
I know I'm such a generalist.
Right. How do you market yourself? How do you tell people who you are when you do so many things, like in a job interview, for example?
Oh, I'm a big fan of one. I have a comic resume. So I have like the stale, boring resume, but I also have a resume that's like a comic, and I think it visually does a better job of like explaining what I do. They don't have to know everything, right? Like, it's like drinking like a fire hose to be like, yes, I'm super qualified at all of these things. That also tends to be why I end up in roles where I end up doing a lot of things as part of the role, because there's if you are a generalist or you're someone that's good at making things happen, but you're not necessarily like, I'm never going to be an expert specialist on a certain part of the tax code. But what I can do is learn enough about the tax code very quickly to make sure that it's implemented in a way where we're going to get our taxes as an organization done and it's going to be fine, right? Or well enough to be able to interview an expert on it on my show or write an episode about how it affects you, right? Like, but I'm never going to be someone who spends 20 years of my life working on changing a specific part of the tax code. And I think if you are in that camp where you are a generalist, there are always small organizations that need that. And I think largely the way that my career has gone, and one of the reasons that entrepreneurship followed so naturally, is that I spent so long working in really small organizations, like super small nonprofits, businesses of 1 or 2 people, where of course I had to do a bunch of things. There's only 2 people. Like,
that's
of course
great advice.
I have to do fundraising and finance, and like I play HR when I need to, and like you know, and that's just like a pattern that happens when you work in small organizations. I had an experience where I did like a 3-month contracting gig for like a mid-sized corporation. For me, it was massive. It was like, you know, 500 employees across 2 campuses or something, which by the context of where I've worked was massive. Because even like the largest technical organization I ever worked for was Congress, but I worked in the district office with 4 other staff. So like, I wasn't interacting with like
right.
the operation that was Congress. But I worked in this corporation, and it was so weird to me to need sign off from anyone, because everywhere I've worked has been like, you're trying to prevent yourself from getting more things on your plate and making decisions, versus like, this is a place where like, I would be like, oh, this process should probably like get implemented. And I'm thinking like, oh, do I have time to be able to like do this thing that's like and not even, and then someone would be like, oh yeah, let's send that up the ladder. And it's a literal ladder. Like, you know, and I've never even worked somewhere where like marketing is separate from content, right? You know, and that I'm not a graphic designer, but like I've had to design 40-page documents to get sent out to 200,000 people.
Yeah. So like
with 24 hours notice, because I work in like, if you work in like politics or small organizations, you just do what needs to happen. And so being a generalist is rewarding, right? And I think that's, if you come from a creative entrepreneur like background, and even if you don't consider yourself an entrepreneur, if you are a creative doing work and making some amount of money from that work, you are an entrepreneur and you are a business and you should own it. But you don't realize all the skills that you have like acquired, right? And it's only when you're put into one of those corporate environments and you see how little people do in their average job in a medium-sized company, where you're like, and it's not necessarily that they're not doing a lot of work, but the scope of their work is so small that you're like, oh man, I know how to touch a lot of things. And you know, in Oregon, 1 in 4 businesses is a micro enterprise, meaning 5 or less employees. Like, majority of people in the state are employed or in some capacity work for a micro enterprise. And so like, people need to understand that being a generalist is a valuable skill set. And we were all sold the myth that
you have to specialize. It's bullshit. Yeah. And I like hearing like you be so enthusiastic about it. And I'm wondering if there's an end goal. Do you have like a final place that you hope to like end up with this skill set?
Oh, I mean, my goal was running my media business, but it turned out I didn't like being my own boss exclusively. Like, and I didn't feel like I could scale the organization without outside funding to the point where I could hire and like pay enough other people to kind of compensate for the fact that like anybody I got input from was someone I was paying directly, like by the hour. And like, it turned out I didn't like that. No, there's no end goal. I mean, I think that like careers in this day and age are like a continually evolving process. And most of us now, like in in the millennial and Gen Z generation, we all have jobs that weren't a thing 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so the idea or expectation that I have an idea where my career is going, I just want to make cool things with cool people that do good things. And I like,
and it seems like you're on the right track.
Sometimes. And then, you know, it's like it's a constantly evolving thing, but yeah.
I saw that you're planning to do more YouTube this year. That's one of your goals. Do you have?
It's a perpetual goal. I've been on YouTube for 14 years, friend. 14? What year is it? How old am I? I've had a YouTube account since 2006. I've been putting videos on it, and every year, this year I'm going to make more YouTube videos. Last year I made a goal that I was going to make a video a week.
Yeah.
And I did really well until March. And then I went to Japan for 3 weeks. And I don't know what happened. I have so much footage. I traveled so much last year. I have a day in the life of from London. I was living in London in August. I filmed multiple day in the lives while I was there. They are sitting on hard drives.
I hope we get to see them. Thanks so much for talking with me. We hit our time, but to part, I want to know what your favorite resources or things on the internet are. Like, what are your favorite things that you recommend to others? It could be books, like websites, Instagrams. I don't like what do you love?
Yeah, I absolutely love. One, I love podcasts. Shout out to podcasts generally. Specifically,
recommends podcasts.
I recommend podcasts. The podcast that I have been diving into the back catalog a lot recently of is Bad with Money with Gabby Dunn, which I guess full disclosure, I was a guest many seasons ago, but she's been doing some really interesting explorations of the structural inequities in the financial systems in the United States. And it's been really fascinating, and it's fun, despite the fact that it's about like really heavy, dry topics. And she has more of a production crew than me, so I think hers is higher quality than mine. I have also, what other things have I been digging? That's a really good question. So Elise Joy is her online like persona. Mm-hmm. She makes the Get to Work book like planner, but she has a podcast about creative small business that
Elise Joy.
Yeah, and her podcast about creative small business, I think, is one of the like most open podcasts about creative small business that I've heard. And she tends to focus on a lot of people who make physical goods, which I think is really a gap in the market of like, there are a ton of people like me who sell stickers and books and things like that. And that's a portion of their income. But so many of the people that create content about creative small businesses on the internet are like creating podcasts about how they create podcasts or how they create or whatever. And
I know this intimately.
Yeah. And so I'm a huge fan of her podcast. And what else do I read? I mean, I spend a lot of time on the Oh My Dollar forums, which I think are an excellent.
It's like, honestly, like hanging out with the people that like to hang out with you. Why not?
Yep.
Great.
Yep, that's where I go.
Well, thank you so much for giving us like just a crash course in what's going on. I like check out the forums or the radio show if you're interested. And thanks so much for coming on The Orbit. Yeah,
thank you so much for having me. But another podcast that I listen to that I really appreciate the conversations of. So
I'm glad. All right, I will talk to you again soon.
Bye.